"Sorry to say, but you're fired," my supervisor said. One day to my $4 million bonus was due. I just nodded. An hour later, their lead lawyer read the clause I'd flagged. She slowly took off her glasses, looked at the CEO, then yelled, "Brian, please tell me you paid him." It wasn't the first time I'd been blindsided, but this was different. It was almost surreal, the kind of moment you don't expect to happen in real life, only in movies. I'd spent 12 consecutive quarters turning a profit, bringing in one deal after another, landing the Hastings account just 3 weeks ago, $8 million in revenue over the next 3 years. I'd built that deal from a napkin sketch on a Delta flight, and now, the company was telling me I wasn't good enough to stick around. One day before my bonus hit. I'd been anticipating this, though. The signs were there. The receptionist wouldn't look me in the eye when I walked past her, and there was a strange heaviness in the air that hadn't been there yesterday. It was like walking into a room where everyone's heard the pot of a joke you haven't gotten yet. The hallway buzzed with hushed whispers as I made my way to the conference room. A few people who should have been working were avoiding my gaze, ducking into side rooms. One of the guys I mentored for 5 years practically bolted to the copy room when he saw me coming. I knew exactly what was happening. As I passed Karen's office, I'd hear her talking behind the closed door. Her voice, laced with that fake sympathy she always used, was about to let someone go. The same tone she'd used when she told Jenny from account her role had evolved beyond her scope. That corporate code for, "You're out of a job." I didn't stop. I didn't need to hear more. I took the long way to the meeting room, not out of fear but strategy. I needed a moment to breathe, to scan the halls and clock long avoiding me. I wasn't wrong, everyone was. They weren't avoiding me because they were worried about my firing. They were avoiding me because they knew what was coming. They were about to watch a disaster unfold, and they didn't need anywhere near the wreckage. I slipped into my office, closed the door behind me, and walked over to the locked drawer. My original contract was there, hidden away. It was a relic of another time, but it was my ticket to freedom, to leverage, and if necessary, to the payout of a lifetime. I opened the drawer and pulled out the contract, flipping through the pages until I found it, Clause 11, subsection C. I ran my finger over the initials, mine, Brian's, and I read the clause. I'd added it during my renegotiation last year after a long back and forth with the company's legal team. It was a clause that ensured I wouldn't be left without recourse if they ever tried to terminate me just before my bonus was due. They'd never read the fine print, and now, it was about to cost them. I folded the contract, slid it to my leather portfolio, and stood up. I adjusted my jacket and smiled into the mirror. Just once, a quick smile, because I knew the next few moments were going to be more satisfying than anything I'd done in years. I wasn't angry, I wasn't panicked. I was about to walk into a storm, and the only thing I'd do was make sure I had the umbrella. I walked out of my office and into the hallway, past the same mural the CEO had commissioned after our Series funding closed, a grotesque backlit monstrosity of innovation that never seemed to include the women who actually closed the deals. Funny, I thought, how they all loved the concept of success but didn't know who actually built the foundation. As I reached conference room 4C, the blinds were already drawn. Karen was sitting at the head of the table, her shoulders tight, her hands clasped in front of her. 2 HR reps sat at the other end, eyes glued to their notepads, clearly avoiding looking at me. No laptops, no notes, no signs of a normal performance review. Just a stilted silence. "Victoria, thanks for joining on such short notice," Karen said with a grimace. The kind she probably used when delivering bad news to interns who were too green to know what was coming. I didn't sit. I just nodded and stood there, arms crossed. I said, my voice calm, steady. "I always make time for my team." Karen gestured to chair across from her, but I didn't move. I could already feel the weight of the termination hanging in the air. She shuffled some papers in front of her, my termination letter, no doubt. I glanced at the sheet, and sure enough, there it was. The one-sentence termination letter. Simple. Effective. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Karen said as if she truly felt it. "We're restructuring. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. Effective immediately." I didn't flinch. I just nodded slowly. "Understood." Karen blinked, surprised. I suppose she'd been expecting breakdown a plea, maybe even some form of protest. She didn't get it. All she got was calm. All she got was the realization that she was about to the biggest mistake of her life. I handed over my badge as she requested, smiled just once more, and walked out of the room without another word. My work here was done. Theirs, however, was just beginning. I walked out of conference room 4C, the door clicking shut behind me. The silence in the hallway was deafening. I wasn't surprised by Karen's words, but that didn't make it easier to hear. The reality of it settled in as I made my way to the elevator. The company I had dedicated over a decade of my life, to the company I had built from the ground up, had just thrown me away like I was nothing. I kept my composure, but inside I was seething. They thought they could get rid of me, take my work, my success, and my loyalty, and just toss me aside the moment they found someone younger, more. The door to the elevator opened with a soft ding, and I sighed, pressing the button for the executive floor. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound as I stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor numbers ticking by. I wasn't going to let this go, not by a long shot. As the elevator ascended, my mind started to race. I thought back to last year's renegotiation, the one that almost didn't happen because they were so eager to get my signature on the dotted line. They had tried to rush me through it, but I'd known better. I'd fought for that clause, Clause 11C, the one that now guaranteed them a very expensive lesson. I didn't even glance at the top floor as I stepped out of the elevator and walked to my office. The walk felt surreal, like I was in a dream where everything around me was fading away, but I was still there standing tall, untouched. I pushed open the door to my office, my heels clicking on the polished tile. The space felt small now, almost suffocating. The empty desk, the framed photos on the wall, it all seemed distant. They had already started packing my things, tossing my personal items into a cardboard box, as if I was just another faceless employee to be forgotten. But I wasn't just another employee. Not to them, and definitely not to me. I walked over to the desk drawer and unlocked it. Inside, buried beneath a few folders, was the contract. My contract, the one I'd written with my own hands, after hours of negotiating, drafting, and reworking. I pulled it out and let it unfold across the desk, the paper crisp and familiar. I ran my fingers over Clause 11C, the clause that made them regret everything. I had been prepared for this. I'd seen it coming for months. They never suspected that someone they thought was just following the rules, playing the game by their standards, was actually playing a much longer game than they could ever fathom. I flipped through the pages, pausing on the paragraph that had been my safety net. The part that had been my insurance policy, the one that protected me from exactly what had just happened. It was airtight, perfectly worded, and they had all signed it. Brian, Karen, the entire leadership team. They thought they were due a favor by firing me before my bonus hit. What they didn't know was that firing me one day before my bonus vested triggered the very clause they thought would save them money. I smiled to myself. It was almost too easy. I could hear the buzz of the office outside, the faint chatter of employees, the whir of a printer in the distance. The atmosphere had shifted. There was a nervous energy in the air, and I knew it was because they were starting to realize what had just happened. They had made a fatal mistake. And now, I was going to make them pay. I grabbed my leather portfolio and tucked the contract inside. My mind was clear now, sharper than ever. I wasn't angry, upset. I was just preparing to do what needed to be done. I walked out of the office, locking the door behind me. The hallway stretched out in front of me like a long empty road. But it wasn't empty, not really. It was full of people who didn't know they were about to watch their world crumble. I could already see it in their faces, the fear, the uncertainty, the dawning realization that they had just kicked out the one person who knew exactly how to make them pay for their mistake. I made my way down the hallway, past the same people who avoided me earlier. Now they were looking at me with a mix of pity and curiosity. They didn't know it yet, but I wasn't just leaving the company. I was about to growl to the ground. When I reached the legal department, I stepped inside without knocking. Aaron Patel was at his desk, the faint hum of his computer screen casting a blue glow across his face. He looked up, startled, but quickly regained his composure when he saw who was. "Victoria," he said, standing up and walking over to me.
1.
I was fired, I said, handing him the portfolio with the contract. And I think it's time we made sure they pay for it. Aaron's eyes widened as he took the portfolio from me and opened it. He scanned the pages quickly, his brow furrowing in concentration. When he reached the crucial clause, his face changed. He read it again, more slowly this time, then looked up at me, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Did you this during your last renegotiation?" he asked. I nodded. Yes, they initialed every page. Even Brian me knelt the multiplier language. I paused, letting the weight of the situation settle in. They thought they could avoid paying me by firing me one day before my bonus vested. What they didn't realize is that this clause isn't just pay a trigger, it's a trap. Aaron sat back in his chair, the realization dawning on him. You're not just getting your bonus, you're getting double, and then some. I didn't say anything, I didn't need to. They're going to pay for this, I said, my voice cold and calm. I'm not here for revenge, I'm here for enforcement. Aaron gave me a long look, then nodded. I'll escalate this to lead counsel. We'll make sure this doesn't get buried. I gave him a small smile. Good. Let's make sure they understand exactly what happens when they mess with the wrong person. I turned and walked out of the office, my heels clicking sharply against the tile. I had no intention of being anyone's pawn anymore. The game had just changed, and now I was in control. I sat back in the leather chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, a constant reminder that I was still in the belly of the beast. The office felt smaller now. The walls closing in had everything that had led up to this moment. A decade of work, of late nights and early mornings, of sacrificing everything for a company that had no hesitation in tossing me aside the moment they thought they could save $1. I didn't feel the anger yet, not fully. It was a quiet kind of rage, one that simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the right time to boil over. But not now. Now, I needed to focus. The original contract was still in my hands. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the weight of the paper settle into my mind. It was funny in a way. All those years, all the deals, and the paperwork that came with it. And yet this small stack of pages was about to be the bid that would destroy everything they thought they had built. Clause 11C, that was the key. It had been my insurance policy. At the time, I didn't think I'd need it. But then, of course, I didn't account for the fact that they'd come for me the moment they thought I was no longer useful. I'd negotiated that clause during the last renegotiation, after my fourth quarter bonus had nearly been jeopardized by a last-minute restructuring. I'd been sitting in a hospital bed at the time, recovering from pneumonia, trying to force myself to stay awake long enough to make the deal. The lawyers had been insistent. They wanted my signature, wanted me to sign off on terms that left me exposed if the company ever turned on me. I knew better. The contract I signed was ironclad, but that one clause, Clause 11C, was the one thing guaranteed I wouldn't be left with nothing. I couldn't help but smile at the memory of that meeting. The lawyers were in a rush to get me to sign, trying to gloss over the fine print, but I'd read it all. Every word. Every line. I wasn't stupid. They thought I'd be too tired to care, but I was wide awake. I needed to be. If I didn't protect myself, nobody else would. Flipping through the contract now, I found the clause again, reading over the details. It was simple, really. If I were terminated without cause within 24-hour major equity event, like the vesting of my bonus, the clause would trigger. Not just a payout for my bonus, but a multiplier, increasing the payout to 1.5 times my base salary, plus damages if they contested it. It was like a trap they didn't even know they'd walked into. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet of the office sink in. The walls weren't as tall as they had seemed earlier. Now they were just walls, trapping me in a space I was about to leave behind. The company didn't know it yet, but I was about to be their biggest nightmare. I stood up and walked over to the drawer where I had stored my personal effects. The cardboard box on my desk was empty, a subtle indication that they'd already begun the process of erasing me. The thing was, they hadn't even thought to clear out my computers or about data. They thought they had me cornered, that my resignation letter would be the end of it. What they didn't realize was that I'd already built my exit long before they ever considered firing me. I pulled my laptop from the desk, unopened, untouched. I had the backups I needed. The evidence that would turn the tide in my favor. It was all there, every document, every version of the Tari timestamp. It was all perfectly preserved. I had backups of backups, securely stored in places they would never think to look. In the event they decided to challenge the payout, I had proof. And more than that, I had leverage. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. They hadn't just underestimated me. They had miscalculated everything. This wasn't just a termination. This was a financial disaster waiting to happen. I grabbed phone and quickly tapped out a message to Aaron Patel. He'd been a key ally in the Hastings deal, someone who'd always had my back. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about showing them that I wasn't the person they could walk over. This was about making sure they understood that they couldn't throw me away without consequences. Let's make sure they understand exactly what's coming. I want this escalated to lead counsel quietly. No drama, just the facts. I hit send and slipped the phone into my pocket. The wheels were already in motion. I walked out of the office, leaving behind a company that thought they had gotten rid of me. They hadn't. They just triggered a chain of events they couldn't stop. They thought they could get rid of me, but what they didn't know was that I had already planned my exit. And now, I was going to watch as everything they had worked for crumbled around them. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like the slowest of my life. The soft hum of the elevator, the slight vibration beneath my feet, it was as if time itself had slowed. But I wasn't worried. I wasn't in a rush. Everything was happening just the way I wanted it to. I stepped off the elevator, my heels clicking on the tile floor. The lobby was busy with employees coming and going, heads down, eyes focused on their phones. I could see the nervous glances, the whispered conversation, the uncertainty building around me. They didn't know yet. They didn't know what had just happened. And as I walked past the reception desk, I saw the receptionist who had avoided my gaze earlier. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, and for a moment, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. She didn't need to. I wasn't just walking out the door. I was walking away with the last laugh. They had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, I sat in the quiet corner of the cafe, in my hand, staring at the screen but not really seeing anything. The barista had handed me my coffee without much of a glance. The warm cup a small comfort against the biting coolness of the really autumn air outside. The sound of steam rising from the milk frother filled the space, mixed with the clinking of spoons against ceramic mugs, the soft chatter of other early risers, and the low hum of an espresso machine in the background. It was a soothing kind of noise, one that matched the stillness inside me. I wasn't surprised by what had happened. Firing me, that is. I knew the moment I walked into that meeting room that I'd been set up. Karen's sweet tone had been too calculated, too rehearsed. The whole thing had felt off from the start, but now was calm. If anything, I was almost relieved. There was a sense of finality about it all, and a satisfaction that came from knowing the truth. They had just made the biggest mistake of their corporate lives. I took another sip of my coffee, letting the warmth spread through me as I thumbed through the folder on my phone. The contracts, the clauses, the timestamps, they were all in place. Everything was perfectly organized, carefully cataloged, ready to be served like a carefully constructed piece of evidence in a courtroom. The plan was simple. I wasn't here to throw a tantrum, make a scene, or burn bridges. I was here for the payout, but not just any payout. This one was going to cost them more than they could ever imagine. And I was going to watch it all unfold. The phone buzzed in my hand. I didn't need to look at it to know it was Aaron. He'd been following up, keeping me in the loop on the legal escalation. I opened the message, a quick note saying he was escalating the case to lead counsel, and that everything was moving quietly, just as I'd requested. I smiled slightly and set the phone down, my fingers tapping the side of the cup as I let my mind wander. The feeling of control was heady, intoxicating. A small part of me wanted to go back to the office and some scramble, but I couldn't afford to be seen. Not yet. Not until everything was in place. The clink of a spoon a cup pulled me back to the present. I looked up from my phone and saw a familiar face, Sarah Cooper. She was standing at the counter, one of those unfamiliar interns who always seemed to crowd around the corners of the office, like they were waiting for their moment to shine. Her eyes flicked over to me, and for a split second she hesitated. I could see the hesitation in her posture. She wasn't expecting to see me, not here. She didn't know I'd be sitting quietly in the back of this place, a peaceful oasis away from the storm I had just left behind. She didn't approach. Just watched me for a moment, and then turned back to the telter. But I could tell that she knew. She wasn't blind. She had seen what had happened. Word traveled fast, even a place like that, even when it was just a whisper. I chuckled quietly to myself, reaching for my phone again. Sarah wasn't the only one watching. They all were. They thought I was gone. But they were wrong. I was about to rewrite the rules, and they would never see it coming. The light from the windows started to fade as the early morning hours wore on. It was time to go. I paid for my coffee and stepped outside into the crisp air, the city streets full of the usual hustle. The morning rush, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting to Ride-by Bakery, the steady rhythm of feet on pavement, all of it felt so far removed from the chaos I had just left behind. I opened my email as I walked, scanning through messages from Aaron. He had kept things moving fast, sending over the initial documentation to lead counsel and letting me know that everything was already being handled. It was quiet, but the weight of the situation was becoming clear. The next stop was my lawyer's office. It was time to make sure everything was in order for what was coming. I wasn't going to let this slip through the cracks. Not this time. By the time I arrived at the office building, the city had woken up fully. The sun had burned through the last of the early morning haze, casting long shadows across the streets. Inside the building, the sound of phone calls and ringing elevators filled the air, but it didn't matter. I walked straight to the elevator, bypassing the reception desk. The security guard didn't even bat an eye. I didn't need to check in. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a visitor, a very important one. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I stood there in the quiet, the hum of the machinery in my only company, as I made my way up to the legal department. It was time for the real fun to begin. The next few days were a blur of quiet satisfaction. I spent most of my time checking in with Aaron, making sure everything was in motion. The wheels of corporate machinery were slow, but they were turning, and with each passing hour, I could feel the pressure mounting on the other side. I wasn't surprised when Sarah Cooper called. I had expected it. She was one of the few people at the company who had actually paid attention to me over the years, and I knew she wouldn't just sit idly by. I picked up the phone on the first ring. "Victoria," Sarah said, her voice a little breathless. I think you need to know something." I leaned back in my chair, scanning the skyline outside my window. The city was alive with motion, but from up here it felt quiet, distant. "Go ahead," I said, my voice calm. "What's going on?" There was a pause on the other end, and I could practically hear her shifting in her seat. "It's Meredith," Sarah continued. She's already read through everything. The clause, the contract, all of it. She's seen the timestamps, the emails, everything, and she's taking it up to the board." I felt a flicker of something cold in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. "Good," I said. "Let them take it up to the board. Let them see what they've done." Sarah was silent for a moment, and I could tell she was trying to process everything. "Victoria, they have no idea what they've done, do they?" she asked, her voice almost incredulous. "They thought you'd just go quietly like the others, but this is huge." I smiled to myself. "I've been planning this for a long time." Sarah let out a nervous laugh. "I think I'm starting to see that. I mean, I knew you were good, but I didn't realize just how good." I leaned forward, looking out over the city. "That's the thing, Sarah. They've always underestimated me. They think because I've played by their rules, I'm just another cog in the machine. But I've never played by their rules. I just let them think have." I could hear Sarah nodding on the other end. "Well, they're about to get a wake-up call. Meredith says she's pushing for this to go straight to legal. She wants to handle it quietly, but I don't think they can avoid this. The more they try to cover it up, the worse it'll get." I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. "Not doing this for revenge, Sarah," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I'm doing this to make sure they understand that they can't toss people aside like this, without consequences. They built their empire on my back, and now they're going to pay for it." Sarah was quiet again, but this time I could hear the respect in her voice. "You know, I always thought the corporate world was just about climbing your ladder, doing your job, and keeping your head down. But you're making them pay for their mistakes. You're turning this into something else. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. It's not just about money, Sarah. It's about control. They thought they could control me, dictate my worth, my value. But what they didn't understand is that I was the one in control all along. I let the silence hang for a moment before I added, "They're going to learn that the hard way." Sarah let out a breath. "I just hope they realize it before it's too late. This could get really ugly." I smiled, knowing full well that the ugliness had already started. Let it. The uglier, the better. The more they scramble, the more they'll expose themselves. And once that happens, they'll have no choice but to pay up. Another pause, this one longer. "I'll be here if you need me," Sarah said finally. "Thanks," I replied, my voice steady. "But for now, just keep your head down. Let them do the dirty work. I'll handle the rest." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. Sarah was right. They had no idea what they'd just triggered. This wasn't just about a fired executive. This was about a system that had taken advantage of people like me for years, and now I was about to make them pay for it. The next call came an hour later from Aaron. He confirmed that Meredith had escalated the issue to league counsel. I had expected that, but hearing it from Aaron made it feel real. The wheels were turning faster now, and there was no way to stop it. The board was already starting to ask questions. The emails, the timestamps, the documents, they were all lined up, and soon everyone would see the truth. I couldn't help but feel a thrill course through me. They thought they could get rid of me and save money. Instead, they were about to lose far more than they bargained for. By the time I made it back to my apartment later that evening, everything was already in motion. The legal team was meeting with the board, the pressure was building, and all I had to do was wait. I sat at my kitchen counter, sipping my wine, and watched the city lights flicker outside my window. I didn't feel any rush. The calm before the storm was exactly where I needed to be. I knew what was coming, and when it hit, it would be everything I'd been waiting for. I just had to wait for them to implode. The day after I left the building, everything moved faster than I expected. The legal team had already escalated the matter, and the pressure was mounting. I had to give them credit, they might have underestimated me. But they weren't complete idiots. They knew the potential fallout, and by now, they had probably realized they had miscalculated every step. The storm I'd set in motion was coming, and I was just waiting for the first signs of chaos. I had received word from Aaron that Meredith was handling the situation, taking it directly to the board. From what he'd told me, she was furious, both at the con herself for missing the fine print. That was the key. They thought they could outsmart me, but they hadn't bothered to read the terms they had signed. And now, they were about to find out exactly how much that mistake would cost them. It was late afternoon when I got the call. "Victoria," Aaron said on the other end. "We need to talk." I paused, the sound of the city drifting through the window, the usual background hum of cars and distant chatter. "Go ahead." "Meredith's on the warpath," he continued. "She's been reading through everything, the clause, the caps, the emails. She's upset, and she's not taking it well. It's moving faster than we thought." I smiled to myself. I'd known this would happen. They couldn't help themselves. Now that they understood the depth of their error, they were scrambling to fix it, but the truth, there was no easy fix. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the board's already discussing it," Aaron replied. "They're calling an emergency meeting, but there's no getting around it now. The clause is airtight. They're legally on the hook, and it's only a matter of time the whole thing blows up." I could feel the tension rise in my chest. This was it. The calm before the storm had finally given way to the inevitable unraveling. Good. Let them talk it out. I don't want any public spectacle, but I also don't want thinking they can just bury it. The more they try to fix it on their own, the worse it'll get for them. Aaron was quiet for a moment. I could hear the gears turning on his end. "I'll keep pushing from our side. Meredith isn't backing down. She's already warned them that if they don't handle this properly, the company's going to be facing a major legal liability. Not just financial, it's going to be reputational too. Let's see how long they can maintain the illusion of control," I said softly. They were about to realize how wrong they were about me. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, letting the cool evening air fill the room. The city outside felt so far removed from the drama unfolding behind closed doors. In a few hours, everything could change, but right now, it was just me and the quiet hum of the world outside. I was waiting for something more than just the company's collapse. I was waiting for my moment, the moment when I would get what was rightfully mine. The next morning, I woke up early, the sunlight filtered into the blinds. It was a crisp morning, the air sharp and fresh. I stepped into the shower, letting the hot water loosen the tension from my muscles. As I stood there, eyes closed, I thought about everything of me here, every meeting, every deal, every late night spent making sure I was always one step ahead. I had spent years learning how to navigate corporate landscapes, how to spot the cracks in the system, how to use them to my advantage. And now, I was about to prove exactly why they should have never underestimated me. I dressed carefully that morning, slipping into a dark bar and a tailored skirt. It wasn't about looking the part, it was about feeling the part. I had built my career from the ground up, and now, I was about to watch it all come full circle. I didn't have to say a word. The company's actions had already set the wheels in motion. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the fallout to hit. Around noon, I got the first sign that the company was starting to crack. An email from Aaron popped up on my phone. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. The subject line read simply, "Emergency meeting board's response." I opened the email. "Victoria," it began. "They've agreed to move forward with a payout. It's going to be big. Really big. The board is panicking, trying to figure out how they minimize the damage, but Meredith is making sure they understand the gravity of the situation." The email detailed the terms the company was offering. The payout wasn't just my bonus. With the multiplier clause activated, it was more than the original amount, plus additional damages. They thought they could stop it, but now they were scrambling to mitigate the damage. I smiled. Aaron's message continued. "They've asked to meet in person tomorrow, but it's clear they know they have no other option now. They'll pay up. The only question is how much more they're willing to use in the process." I knew they were hoping to offer me a settlement, to try and avoid the full payout, but that wasn't going to happen. This wasn't about making a deal. This was about forcing them to own up to their mistake. I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the weight of the situation settle in. It was happening. The board was finally realizing the magnitude of their mistake. They had fired me, thinking they could get away with it. Now they had no choice but to pay. As the evening stretched on, I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. They thought they were in control, but I was the one who'd been pulling the strings all along. They were about to pay the price for underestimating me, and when it was all over, I'd be walking away with everything they owed me, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger. They had already dug their own grave. The next day, the tension in the air was palpable. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the company's leaders realized the full extent of their mistake. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the fact that they thought they could dispose of me, that they could discard me without consequences. They had no idea what was coming, but today they were about to find out. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer for the final time. The reflection staring back at me was calm, collected. I didn't need to let them see the storm that was raging inside me. This was business. Cold, calculated, and precise. The call came right on time. It was Aaron again. "Thief Ellie correct," he said, his voice a little tighter than usual. "The board's in full damage control mode. Meredith's still pushing for the payout, but now they're asking questions. They want to know how this got so out of hand." I couldn't help but smile. "They're panicking, aren't they?" "Yeah," Aaron said, his voice almost a whisper. "They're scrambling. Meredith is handling the legal side, but they're all worried at the optics now. The longer this drags on, the worse it's going to get." I glanced at the clock on the wall. I had a meeting with the board in just a few hours. "Luthen Sable," I said. "I want this to get as ugly as possible. The more they try to cover it up, the more it'll blow up in their faces. They need to learn that they can't just erase people like this." Aaron hesitated. "Victoria, you're not thinking about going public with this, are you?" I paused. The thought had crossed my mind. Public exposure could make things move even faster, but wasn't the point. Not yet. No, I'm letting them make the first move. Let them make it public if they want to. But they're not getting off the hook. I'll keep you posted, Aaron said, and with that, he hung up. I felt a surge of satisfaction. The storm was coming, and I was just waiting for them to realize it was too late to stop it. I grabbed my bag and headed out the door. I wasn't walking into that meeting as an underdog anymore. I was walking in as someone who had already won. The drive to the building was almost peaceful. The city buzzed around me, the usual chaos of people rushing through their daily lives. Oblivious to the seismic shift that was about to occur, one of the tallest buildings in town. As I pulled into the parking garage, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Everything had been carefully planned, calculated, and now it was finally coming together. I walked through the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from the staff behind the front desk. They didn't know what had happened. They didn't know that I wasn't just a casualty of corporate greed. I was the one pulling the strings now. I made my way to the elevators and hit the button for the executive floor. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped inside, the softness of the elevator a stark contrast to the storm brewing behind the walls. As I walked into the conference room, I could already sense the tension. Karen was there, seated at the head of the table, her posture stiff and defensive. She barely looked up as I entered. The other members were seated around her, some fidgeting, others avoiding eye contact. But Brian, the CEO, was conspicuously absent. I didn't need to ask where he was. He was probably hiding behind closed doors, trying to figure out how to spin this into something that wouldn't ruin his career. Victoria, Karen said, her voice forced and tight. She motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing, my eyes scanning the room. The atmosphere felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to discuss your termination and the subsequent matters regarding your contract. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm sure you did, I said coolly. But I'm not here to discuss my termination. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what you've done. Karen shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. Victoria, we've reviewed your contract. No, I interrupted on sharp. You haven't. You've seen the terms, but you haven't read the fine print. You've made a mistake and now you're going to pay for it. The room went silent, and I could feel the eyes of the board members on me, some of them shifting nervously. This wasn't the confrontation they had been expecting. I'm not here for a fight, I continued. I'm here to make sure you do the right thing. You've triggered a clause in my contract that guarantees I'll receive a payout. A large one. One that you didn't think would apply to me, but it does, and you'll be paying for it. Karen's face went pale, her hand gripping the armrest of her chair. Victoria, we didn't mean for it to go this far. You didn't mean to, I said, my voice steady. That's the problem. You never took the time to understand what you were doing. You thought you could just get rid of me and everything would be fine. But it's not fine. You've activated a clause that not only guarantees my bonus but multiplies it. And now, you're going to owe me even more than that, plus damages. And if you think you can get out of it, well, you'll find out hard way that you can't. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as I let my words hang in the air. There was no turning back now. They were trapped, and they knew it. I watched as Karen's face tightened, her lips pressed in a thin line. The other board members exchanged quick, worried glances, and I could almost hear their thoughts. How did we miss this? What have we done? Finally, Karen cleared her throat. We'll need to consult with legal, but I'm afraid this is beyond what we anticipated. That's right, I said, giving her a thin smile. You're going to need more than legal advice. You'll need a miracle. It was quiet for a long moment, then Karen spoke again, her voice trembling. What is it that you want from us, Victoria? I leaned forward, letting the weight of the situation settle between us. What I want is simple, I said. I want what's mine. And I want you to understand that this isn't just about money. It's about accountability. You wanted to play the game, but you forgot one thing, one who wrote the rules. The tension in the room was thick now, and I could tell that Karen was no longer sure of what to say. The meeting had turned into something else, something that wasn't about negotiations anymore. It was about survival. and the company had just realized that they were on the wrong side of this. They had no idea what was coming next. And I was more than ready to let them find out. I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the city below. It was dusk, and the skyline glittered with a soft, fading light. The usual noise of honking horns and distant chatter filtered through the air, but here, at this height, it felt almost peaceful. The chaos of the last few days seemed like a distant memory, just another part of the story I was watching unfold. The message from Aaron came through, just as I was about to take a sip of my wine. He had been keeping me in the loop with everything happening in the company. The board was scrambling to contain the fallout, but they were too late. They had already made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. The subject line of the email read, "Settlement agreement, final payout confirmed." I opened immediately and my eyes scanned the details. The settlement offer was exactly what I expected, more than enough to cover what was owed, and then some. The numbers weren't a surprise. The terms were exactly as they should have been from the beginning. The email was short and to the point. Payment of $6,586,250, pending NDA agreement. No public disclosure permitted without board consent. I didn't even need to read it all. I had already won. The money was already mine, and with it, the satisfaction of knowing they had been played. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just calm. It was a strange feeling, almost like everything had come full circle. I poured myself another glass of wine and leaned back in my chair, the soft leather creaking beneath me. The company, the people I had worked for, had tried to play a game with me, thinking I didn't know the rules. But I had known all along. I'd known exactly what I was doing when I negotiated that clause. It had started as a simple precaution, a way to protect myself. But now it was more than that. It was a statement, a reminder to them that no matter how high up they had climbed, they were still vulnerable. It didn't matter how much money they had or how many deals they closed. If you played the game without considering every angle, you lost. And they had lost. I glanced at my phone, and another notification popped up. This one was from Official, she wrote. The board just finalized the payout. They're scrambling to cover their tracks, but they know they're on the hook. They're offering a package, but it's clear they're in damage control mode. Meredith is pushing for it, but I think you've already won. Congratulations. I smiled to myself, reading the message. It felt good, but I had imagined. I had spent years working in that world, playing by their rules, and now I was getting what I was owed. No apologies, no explanations. Just the cold, hard truth of the contract they had signed. I didn't reply to Sarah immediately. Instead, I set my phone down and turned to the city outside my window. It was hard to believe it had come to this. After everything, years of hard work, of constantly pushing myself to meet their expectations, of bending over backwards for a company that never gave me a second thought when it came time to make tough decisions. They had finally seen what happened when they underestimated me. A light knock at the door broke my reverie. I stood in waver, pulling the door open. A small envelope was handed to me, the wax seal on the back unmistakable. It was from the board, the official settlement offer. I closed the door behind me and tore open the envelope, pulling the letter inside. The language was formal, but the message was clear. They were offering the full payout, no questions asked, provided I signed the NDA and agreed to their terms. The payment was guaranteed, but the clause of confidentiality non-negotiable. Of course, it wasn't about the money anymore. They had already lost. I didn't need to think twice. I signed the papers, sealing the deal in a few swift strokes. There was no fanfare, no drama. It was just a matter of course now. As I folded the papers and them aside, I glanced back at the city. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of purple and gold. It was a beautiful view, but I wasn't here to admire the scenery. I was here to collect the prize, and I had done just that. They thought they could get away with it, but I'd been 3 steps ahead of them the whole time. Now, I was walking away with everything they owed me and more. They didn't even know how deep I had played them. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving that I had always been in control. I walked over to the balcony and stepped outside. The breeze was cool against my skin, and I took a deep breath, savoring the air. I wasn't going back to that company. They had made their choice, and now I was free. Free to move on, free to build something better. I had the leverage, and most importantly, I had the respect that they had never given me. As I looked out over the city, I sent one final message. This one was for the board chair, the man who had signed the papers, the one who had failed to see what I was capable of. The words were simple. Close 11C, line 22. And just like that I was done. No more games. No more corporate lies. Just the sound of my heels clicking against the tile as I walked away from everything they had built. Because now, I had the last word. And in the end, that was all that mattered. I took one last look at the view, then turned and closed the door behind me. The city was still alive, still moving. But I was moving on to something bigger. Something bigger.